Welcome to this week's With Liberty and Justice for Some. We've got a great episode for you, a very timely episode given what's happening in the Middle East. The head of Anera, which provides a lot of humanitarian assistance in Gaza and the West Bank and has for many, many years. We've got the head of Anera with us today, Sean Carroll, and you're going to get a good update on the humanitarian condition on the ground, specifically in Gaza and the West Bank. But first, we're going to have Tiffany Muller, who's the head of End Citizens United, with us to answer a quick question. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I have a question for you, Tiffany. If you could change any one federal law, what would you change?
Well, I would change campaign finance law, and I would, that's not going to surprise anyone.
I kind of thought that one, yes.
Very biased here, but I think that we need to make sure that we have limits and full disclosure and transparency in our campaign finance laws. And we need to go back to the days where corporations weren't able to spend in our elections. So that would be what I would change, and it's because it impacts every other policy priority we care about.
It does.
Whether it is gun violence safety or climate change or lowering prescription drug costs or an economy that is fair and works for everyone, to get and make progress on that, we have to get the money out of politics.
Yeah, that's kind of the answer I expected, but I'm glad you had it to share with everyone. Thanks so much, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome to With Liberty and Justice for Some. I'm Mark Pocan. An issue I've been active on all my life has been human rights. And since coming to Congress, a lot of that focus has been on the Middle East. I've done 3 trips to the Middle East with 3 very different groups, and I've had the opportunity to see the conditions firsthand over a 12-year period. And frankly, I'm incredibly worried. Even prior to October 7th, of 2023, Gaza has been largely an ignored open-air prison, despite 2.3 million people living there. Israel largely controls who can go in and out, and I've twice been denied permission to go in by Israel, despite the U.S. support for many efforts that are in that area. The West Bank is a confusing jumble of geographic areas with differing legal distinctions, but unified only by an amazing amount of illegal settlements by Israelis, making it harder to get a peace plan that many of us have argued for, which is returning to the lines of 1967 with some simpler land swaps. There are lots of people who could discuss the many aspects of the situation in the Middle East from various standpoints, but I wanted to focus less on what happened and more on what is happening, especially in terms of the humanitarian situation on the ground. So today we have a very special guest, Sean Carroll. Sean is the president and CEO of Anera, leading a staff of 150 in Lebanon, Palestine, both the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, Jordan, and Washington, D.C., delivering over $100 million in humanitarian and development assistance annually to refugees and vulnerable communities in the Middle East. Sean, you also worked, you already know this, but I'm doing this for everyone else's sake, in several international development and policy roles all over the world, including Creative Associates International, USAID, the Club of Madrid, Congress, the UN World Food Program, and the National Democratic Institute. So Sean, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Congressman.
Yeah, thank you. So let's just start real simple. In your own words, please explain what Anera is for folks who may not know.
Yeah, Anera is a U.S. non-governmental organization, NGO, that was actually established after the 1967 Arab-Israeli War and the ensuing refugee crisis and humanitarian crisis there. So, in a sense, the work that we're doing now in response to October 7th and the Israeli response and the war in Gaza is in our DNA. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it's not our preferred work. We prefer to work on the long-term human development, working on education and livelihoods and agriculture and community infrastructure that we've been doing for 55 years. But, unfortunately, over the past nearly 18 months, almost all of our work in Palestine has been focused on emergency humanitarian needs in Gaza and now, unfortunately, in the West Bank as well.
Yeah. So explain a little bit about It's I'm saying Anera. I was saying Anera. Thank you.
No, either way, Anera.
Okay, all right.
The original name is American Near East Refugee Aid, and we shortened it to Anera because that's how people refer to us. And also, some people don't know what Near East is. It's an older geographic term. It's the Middle East, and we are very much an American NGO. But our support, our work, of course, is in the region, and our support comes from all around the world. And so we thought Anera. That's the name people know us by.
No, that's
and
perfect.
You can say Anera or Anera.
Okay, thank you.
Your choice.
I think a lot of us do that when we come to various acronyms in Washington. So explain a little bit about, you explained how long you're around. How many people do you have specifically, I guess, in Israel, Palestine, in that area, and what kind of work are you currently doing on the ground? Yeah,
so we have a staff. It's grown some, but it's a fairly small staff. And actually last year we delivered over 200 million in assistance in Palestine, Lebanon, and Jordan, with fewer than 200 staff globally and fewer than 100 in West Bank. It's actually only about 60 in Gaza, West Bank. We have now 15. We had 12 on October 7th, 2023. We had 12 staff in Gaza, all Palestinians from Gaza, working in the communities they're from. One was killed in an Israeli airstrike just over a year ago on March 8th last year, and his young son was killed in the same attack. Every one of our Gaza staff have lost family members. We also have staff in Jerusalem, in Ramallah, and in Hebron, but it's fewer than 60 in the entire Palestinian territories.
Wow. Yeah, I've been to, I think, all those communities you just mentioned. I know there was a period where Israel was targeting some of the aid groups. Were you ever, I know we're a U.S.-based group, so maybe not, but has there been anything that has been in conflict with your organization and what's going on by the Israeli government?
Oh, yes. It's a constant source of frustration and anger and sadness. I mean, I am absolutely confident, and always have been, never more so than right now, that the work that we do is in everyone's interest. And so the idea that it's hindered, and of course we have to follow U.S. and international laws on ensuring prevention of assistance to designated terrorist organizations, and we do that very well and have been doing it for 55 years. We follow international humanitarian laws and principles. We have a board that governs how we work. There's more vetting done. Your listeners may or may not know. There's more vetting of our partners, our organizations that are receiving assistance and funding from us than anywhere else in the world. I mean, the U.S. government, the U.S. Congress, and the administrations ensure a very high level of vetting of assistance going into Palestinian communities, higher than anywhere else in the world. And we're expert at complying with that. And it's onerous, and often we wish it weren't as onerous, but we're very keen and to ensure that we're partners in making sure that funding goes to where it's supposed to go, to the most needy and vulnerable people, and not to where it's not supposed to go. And there's a lot of discussion now. There's an Israeli narrative, and many in the U.S. administration and Congress and every administration are very focused on the narrative that aid is all diverted, or much of it is diverted. And that hasn't been our experience, actually. And we are very good at ensuring that aid is not diverted to where it's not supposed to go.
So what does that look like, the $200 million in aid? I mean, give us an idea. I think most people don't really know the scope of this.
Well, the big surge did come after October 7th, 2023, when our community, and a growing community, and our community doesn't, when I say our community, it's Americans mostly, but also from around the world, but Americans from all stripes and flavors. And we've always had a lot of Jewish supporters, donors. A large portion of the Palestinian and Lebanese and Arab diaspora living here, American citizens, but of Palestinian or Lebanese descent. But Latinos, white Americans, Black Americans, we have a lot of support for those who are paying attention to this region and to these needs. And it needs to continue to grow, because there needs to be greater recognition that there won't be there won't be peaceful coexistence until every community has safety and security and opportunity and livelihoods and dignity and prosperity and justice.
Yeah.
And that's not the case now. So, but that surge that support has surged. We have over 83,000 new donors since October 7th, 2023.
Wow.
We have more than 300 U.S. companies that are matching their employees' contributions to Anera. We have about 100 organizations that are doing their Gaza emergency response with us or through us. So they're providing funding or donated product. A lot of that $200 million in assistance last year is donated product, medicines mostly, or in terms of the value, mostly medicines, but also food and tents and hygiene kits and menstrual management kits and water and everything needed to survive.
So is there a rough breakout of like what's food and water, medicine, tents? You mentioned some of the things like, I don't know if people really even understand what it looks like on the ground there to understand what that assistance is.
Yeah. Well, on October 7th, 2023, I'll paint a little bit of a picture. When, first of all, I, like everyone, I think, couldn't believe the news.
Right.
Waking up to news that that there had been a breach of the border because, again, maybe your listeners don't know that over the past few years in Gaza, there's been nonviolent protest, the land movement trying to protest the occupation and the fact that people in Gaza are trapped. There isn't freedom of movement. And so there were protests often near the border, but not going up to the border, because if Palestinians go up to the border, they usually get shot.
Right.
And so the idea that they would actually breach was pretty fantastical in the sense of unbelievable.
Yeah.
But hearing the news and the destruction and the death and the killing and the numbers, we knew that the Israeli response would be strong. So we called a staff meeting that morning on a Saturday morning, and for the next 430 days had a Gaza emergency response meeting, which was at 7 a.m. Eastern time, our time here, to ensure that we could deliver as quickly and as much as we could. And in the beginning, you may remember Israel had a blockade, there's been a 17-year blockade and siege on Gaza implemented by Israel and by Egypt. So a movement of goods and services and people highly restricted. But there was a complete blockade and siege after October 7th in the heat of the response there that went on for 2 weeks. So immediately we had to procure locally. And so we had funding and procured locally, starting with food, and we've now delivered over 64 million meals. So our big focus has been on meals. We've had a lot of support from and partnership with World Central Kitchen, from the World Food Program, and from a lot of other donors, big focus on food. For most of the war, the only items that the Israelis would allow in were food, water, shelter, and medicine or medical supplies. But the shelter's been difficult. I mean, some organizations, including particularly UN agencies, have brought in a lot of tents. We've tried very hard to bring in tents, and we have, but only about 7,000.
Oh, wow.
When the need is obviously hundreds of thousands, when nearly all of Gaza's more than 2 million population have been displaced.
Yeah. The conditions now, I mean, October 7th, we saw things, a response from Israel start to where we're at now. If you had to describe what it is, the conditions in Gaza right now, what are we talking about?
Yeah, and I've been there. I've been there twice during the war. I went in December 23, and then again this past December. So I was there a few months ago. The war obviously was going on both times. A colleague just went in during the recent ceasefire, also from the U.S. staff. Our West Bank, our Palestinian colleagues in the West Bank in Jerusalem have not been given permission to go to Gaza. So only our U.S. If you're our Palestine country director is American citizen, but she's also Palestinian. And if you have any Palestinian ID, the Israelis won't let you go into Gaza, and they restrict the movement. But I was in December, and I have to say that the devastation and the level of destruction was worse than I expected. And I had a pretty good idea of what it was, both because I had been in a year before, but also we're getting constant reports, and we're seeing a lot of news and social media. If you're looking for it, or you're tapped into it, there is a lot of content on media, and I encourage listeners to look around and inform themselves of what's going on. So I expected a lot of, but it was worse than I thought. I mean, the whole Rafah, and I couldn't even see the very worst parts. They were closed off military zones. So the very south in Rafah, the very north above Gaza City, which is Beit Jalia, Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, Jabalia, Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun. I couldn't even see those. But what I did see in Gaza City, in Khan Yunis, in the outskirts of Rafah, coming in from the south, from Karem Abu Salam, was worse than I imagined. At the same time, and I think this is very important, I saw already, and there wasn't a ceasefire yet, but people are always looking for, how do we get through this? How do we rebuild? I saw graffiti on the walls that said, Gaza will rebuild. We're not going anywhere. Our staff and others pointing to that proudly. And I saw a warehouse being built. I saw a municipal team of 3 or 4 workers clearing rubble so that they could repair a water main line that was going to serve 10 or 20,000 people in the middle area. Even though they were no guarantee of their safety, they had been shot at by Israeli forces the prior week. I saw some kids returning to some semblance of school wearing book bags, including carrying school bags that Anera has provided with support from many donors. And a brand new sweet shop near our office in Gaza City. And we're in the same building, the same office we've been in for more than 40 years, and it is intact. So, so there is a significant percentage still that is intact. And there's been some rebuilding. A video the other day showing a shopping mall full and a well-stocked and well-appointed shopping mall that you would think could be anywhere, maybe even in the U.S. or Dubai. And I said, well, that's from before the war, right? And the answer was, no, that's actually now. So during the ceasefire, a lot of aid came in. People start to rebuild, which is why now we're in such a tragic moment where the war has started again. And I think that energy, that resilience, that resourcefulness to keep going is now being very, very tested. And for many of us, it would have been tested months ago. The resourcefulness, the resilience is amazing. We made a stop in Gaza City, made several stops to see some of the local distribution centers of food, of hygiene kits. And we were in one for 10 or 15 minutes. We came out and there was a flat tire in our car. And I said, oh no, but immediately they grab a pump out of the trunk, hook it up to the tire, hook the pump up to the car battery, pump up the tire in 20 seconds, and we're off. So, the human is capable of a lot of resilience and resistance, and they have been to extraordinary lengths. But I think it's really important that people understand just how cruel and inhumane and tragic the situation is right now. I mean, right now we're hearing you mentioned humanitarians have been killed. We've lost staff, hundreds now. It's over 300 humanitarian workers, or over 200 humanitarian workers, over 300 healthcare workers. Journalists, 2 journalists were killed yesterday. We saw that in the West Bank. We can't forget the West Bank. The Oscar-winning director of the best foreign language film, No Other Land, Palestinian-Israeli production with a Palestinian-Israeli director. The Palestinian director was beat up by Israeli settlers yesterday and arrested by IDF forces. So a lot of innocent people and people who may protest the continued occupation but do so in a nonviolent way are getting harassed, getting killed.
We'll come to the West Bank in a second, but how about the medical situation? Because I know for a while they said they were not bombing hospitals, but I believe hasn't almost every hospital been bombed at this point, I think?
Just about every hospital has been attacked or damaged, sometimes with collateral damage, but many times direct targeted hits. And also this week, ambulances and vehicles being targeted. So the onslaught now is much heavier, hard to imagine, but much heavier and more brutal than it was in the first 15 months of the war.
Are there still advance notices? I remember in the beginning they would give notice. What is that situation like now?
Yeah, good question. Our sense is, and we're communicating, coordinating with all of the NGOs working there and reporting out on this, but our sense is that the coordination and deconfliction has gotten even worse. It has never been guaranteed, as we see humanitarian aid workers. So either the coordination and deconfliction isn't working as it should, or it's being ignored. And there is worry that that's now getting worse.
And what is the situation for food and water?
Well, no aid has gone in now for 24 straight days. So there was a nearly 2-month ceasefire and surge in aid. 600 trucks a day were going in, and it was precisely 600 trucks a day, which proved what all of us who work on the ground were saying during the 15 months of the war, that if there's the will, then there's definitely the way. Yeah. We were averaging about 110 trucks a day over the first 15 months, about 20% of the need, 20% of the need. And when they opened up more borders and more hours and more manpower and a less stringent inspection system, they were getting in 600 a day. And now that's been stopped again for 24 days. And food supplies run out very quickly.
How about water? I mean, I remember even prior to October 7th, something like 95% of the water wasn't drinkable. I know in my community in Madison, Wisconsin, in my district, we have an informal sister city relationship with Rafa.
Yes.
And so we've been part of fundraisers for water filtration units that would go to school and support the families around that school for years. But there's always been a problem with water. I can only imagine it's got to be far worse.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's absolutely critical. The percentage of potable water, drinkable water, has remained low. We did a lot of work, including with U.S. funding, U.S. taxpayer funding on water and wash, and we increased the amount of domestic use water greatly. But a lot of that is now damaged. I'll tell you a nice story from the beginning of the war, about 30, 40 days in November 2023. At that point, our staff there, the calls they were getting were all, please help, please bring us food, please bring us water. One call they got was from a farming cooperative in Rafah that we had worked with, and I had visited recently. We had set up a water filtration system powered by solar energy, and they were calling just to say, we just want to thank you, Anera, because of the work you did in our cooperative, we're still feeding 1,000 people a day. Wow. And it was at that moment that I realized, sometimes people feel that the United States is spending too much money on human development around the world. And this was an example where if we had had more of that,
right, how much more?
The resilience, and including, I would venture to say, the likelihood of an October 7th happening is greatly reduced. Because if you give people, if you give them education, if you give them water, if you give them livelihoods, education, hope, they turn to productive activities and not destructive ones. We, with U.S. taxpayer money, we refurbished the oldest and largest sports facility in the Palestinian territories, which happens to be in Gaza, over 100 years old and large, 2 football fields, 3,000 person basketball stadium, not quite like University of Wisconsin-Madison size, but nice for the community. And that's where you want kids going. That's where you want them to go and blow off steam. Yeah. And that's been damaged in the war, hopefully not completely, but we need more of that, not less. If there's more human development, we reduce the likelihood of people turning to destructive.
To give people an idea of, what a little bit of money can do and help, like that water filtration that you did with solar. Do you know roughly what that costs?
I mean, we're doing reverse osmosis water filtration systems for $10,000 or $20,000. Solar systems for the same.
I remember ours was about $25,000. I think when we raised the money locally.
Yeah, you're a water pump in a community. Another visit I did in the north of Gaza when I first started about 7 years ago at Anera. There was a small community water pump for water for the community, and the actual housing for the equipment was pretty small, like a backyard shed, and then there was a kind of a carport next to it. And I said, what's this space for? And they said, that's for the community, used for weddings, for birthdays, in a space where you don't have a lot. We're thinking about how do we do community infrastructure where you've got the provision of services, but also you've got the community in mind. And we need more of that. And if you've got that, then people have got some hope for the future.
And then one last Gaza kind of specific question, but the shelter in Gaza, what's left structure-wise? What is the current situation for people?
Yeah, this is, I mean, it's hard to say what's more critical and what's more drastic, the food or the water or the health care. And we've done a lot on health care too. I could talk about our community health clinics. We just moved one. We have a community health clinic built with recycled materials from aid delivery. So meaning basically the wood from the pallet of aid delivery. We built benches, we built desks, we built a little pharmacy with a window, and we have an 8 specialty community health center where hundreds of people come every day. And we had to move it the other day, and we moved it 300 meters, and they disassembled it, built it all up again. And it's amazing what we're doing under really difficult conditions. On shelter, this will be the biggest challenge. And President Trump is right to say you can't rebuild people, you can't rebuild with people living on the rubble. But of course, you also can't force them to leave. And people are moving back to their homes. Now some of them, after the war started again, they're moving again. But during the ceasefire, they moved mostly from the south back to their homes in Gaza City. And they will pitch a tent or some kind of structure on top of the rubble of their home. Yeah. Some were able to go into homes. It's about 30% of homes are still habitable, although I think when engineers take a look at them, they may say, well, that crack is, a little bigger than you might think, and you should worry about it because people are living in precarious situations now. They will need to move so that there can be rebuilding, and the rebuilding needs to be built back better. There has to be more sustainable, more innovative, cost-effective, using all the most modern technology and techniques for sustainable living. They can't just be cinder blocks and have them look like the refugee camps that exist all over the Middle East, because then you're building a desperation rather than building aspiration and hope.
Yeah. So before we transition to West Bank, with where we're at right now with the peace process and the ceasefire status, with the ceasefire kind of breaking down, as of today, and today is, I think, March 25th, am I right on the date, or 26th? What's the date we're doing this?
25th.
25th? Okay, thank you. What is the status?
In West Bank?
In Gaza, with the peace process and the ceasefire, because obviously...
Yeah. Well, the status is, and this isn't our work. We're on the humanitarian response and not on the political negotiations. And but the status is everyone needs to work harder. That's what the status is. Just as an observer and a personal opinion, I think anybody who is participating in and watching and supporting a mediation process, a negotiation process, should remember that it's a negotiation, and expecting one side to give everything without getting anything can be problematic. And there's a lot of discussion that Hamas is that both sides are intransigent. I think that's the view here, that both the Netanyahu government and the Hamas militants in Gaza are intransigent at this point. I think when we look at the hope, the possibility we began to see during the ceasefire with more aid coming in, the possibility of recovering, looking to a permanent end of the war, that's what we all have to look at. I have to say the New York Times reported today on where we are, and it said that some people are hoping for a longer truce. And I'm thinking to myself, it's not some people. It's the vast majority of people in the world want to see a longer. And it's obviously in Palestine, in Gaza, it's in Israel. People are protesting in Israel, calling for a permanent end to the war, because I think people recognize if we want any chance of a peaceful coexistence, what's happening now has to end.
Yeah. So let's move to West Bank. I think all too often we kind of ignore the West Bank because obviously the focus has been in Gaza due to the situation. But generally, what is the situation right now in the West Bank?
It's far, far worse than people recognize. because a lot of the attention has been on Gaza, and the attention's on everything.
Yeah.
How can we even pay attention to Israel-Palestine when there are challenges all around the world, and including in our own country? The number of checkpoints, at one point they hit, I'm forgetting the exact number, I think there were 197 operating throughout the West Bank. 197 checkpoints. Movement is highly restricted. People are stuck in their cities. The bombings now and attacks in the north of Gaza, in Tulkarem and Jenin, nearly 100,000 now have been evacuated, have been forced displaced from their homes in the north of the West Bank, and situation is very dire. So
in the situation of and I'm going to use the term because I think it's the term that's commonly used, illegal settlements, right? Because obviously it's a complicated process of identifying the various zones and what can happen in the various zones in the West Bank. And I think it's in some ways almost intentionally kind of confusing. But if you keep having settlements pop up by Israelis or often by American citizens who have joint citizenship, they seem to be a lot of the folks that are doing the illegal settlements too, as we're looking at this. What does that do to the overall peace process? Because again, if we all go back to, I think what has been traditionally probably the most accepted norm is that you go back to the lines of 1967 with land swaps, making up for where there's been changes. But if you have more and more changes that are unauthorized, it's going to be harder and harder to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such an obvious thing, right? If you the situation you referred to, the complexity of the makeup, the Oslo Accords 40 years ago were 30 years ago, 35 years ago were areas A, B, and C where Palestinians have full control in theory, although Israeli forces can come in any time they want. But in the principal population centers, the cities in the West Bank, Area A, and then you have B where it's mixed, and C where it's still entirely, and the vast majority of the West Bank is Area C, completely controlled by Israel, and each settlement increases that. And so you're moving further away from peace. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and each settlement is a new cut. And it's a stab in the heart of really any hope for peaceful coexistence. And each one of those, long term, for peaceful coexistence, they have to be undone, or there have to be a negotiation. Maybe they don't all get undone, but there has to be some swap for the ones that don't come undone. Otherwise, how can you expect anyone? It's not for us to say. I mean, as Anera, we're one state, two state. We're for the human state, and it's for the parties to figure out what the final settlement should be. But to any observer, it's pretty clear that each new illegal settlement, which goes against even the Oslo Accords, which were supposed to be temporary until we move to a more permanent path to peaceful coexistence. So
So do you know much? And if you don't, I totally would understand. But I think in the South Hebron Hills is one of the areas that I have visited in the past, and there's a small Palestinian village. I think it's Susia. Are you familiar with that area at all?
I don't know.
Okay, because I know that was one. There seems to be some pressures in some of these areas now with the settlements, and we just had some members return from a trip in February, and one of the observations they had, which I thought was interesting, was here was a Palestinian child playing kind of in the dirt barefoot in that area, and then literally within a few stones throws away is this super modern housing development that would rival anything in the United States. That's an illegal settlement in that area. And, we provide an awful lot of assistance, especially when it comes to the defenses, but also the offense, I think military situations in Israel. And yet we see that. I mean, there is definitely money there, but the pressures in Susia, for example, and a number of us, because Rosa DeLauro and myself and Barbara Lee and some others have been to that area. The playground was built by Save the Children and CARE and some other groups. And then, but there's pressures because of those settlements want to squeeze out the people who live there. And are we seeing extra pressure?
Oh, absolutely. The pressure is huge. I mean, the attacks that are going on every day on Palestinian communities, on Palestinian land, and I believe it's over 1 million olive trees have been uprooted over the past few decades, and all of that is increasing. The harassment is, and so we're so far from peace and movement towards it, and that's what we need to get to. And I think, the U.S. The U.S. government, U.S. society, people have actually put time and money and effort into building peace between Israelis and Palestinians, and that work has to continue. But there's not even a base for it now. And I think it's important. The Nita Lowey Middle East Partnership Peace Act is somewhat modeled on the International Fund for Ireland, which was also heavily supported by the United States, President Clinton, George Mitchell, others. And that International Fund for Ireland recognized at the time that there was an economic disparity between the Catholic, Republican, nationalists and the Protestant Union loyalists, but it was, I think, around 60-40. Okay. And in Palestine, Israel, even before October 2023, it was more like 70-30, and now it's probably at 90-10. And so that economic disparity you just spoke about, that you saw in the South Hebron Hills, that's throughout the Palestinian territories. Obviously, Gaza now is almost completely destroyed. So if we don't figure out that until we have that economic equity, we're not going to have any hope for long-term peaceful coexistence.
Yeah. And anything just specific in Hebron that is of note since October 7th of 2023 that should be mentioned?
Well, just the restrictions on movements, and I think there was a lot of integration of the economy, the Israeli. There has been a lot of integration of the Israeli and Palestinian economy. Palestinian economy, particularly for any exports, is entirely reliant on the Israeli economy. And in Hebron, in particular, where much of the business and manufacturing from the Palestine side occurs, there was a lot of that, and I think that's been restricted over the past few months. And so when you restrict that economic development, that integration, that ability to export, then of course you're just making it more difficult for the people who live there. And the settlement issues in Hebron, in the city and in the surrounding areas, are very acute, very difficult.
Yeah. No, it's something when people go, I like to take people right to where one of the gate checkpoints are, where you're in the middle of the city and literally who can go through it. Just
well, I've experienced it. We go with a group, and we're here at the exit of the city, and we need to go just a couple blocks over there where we can see. We parked our car, and they tell us you can, and we say, what do you mean they can? And they say, well, you can, pointing at me, you pointing to one of our Palestinian staff, you can't. And that level of just constant discrimination, I think it's important for people to recognize that that constant harassment and discrimination of people who are innocent civilians, who and even the ones who are protesting but are protesting peacefully, are attacked and are prevented from just living a normal life. You mentioned in the beginning of our discussion the open air prison term that we referred to, Gaza, and I realized after the war started that we actually inadvertently probably did a disservice, because it's an accurate description in some ways, but I always say that when you say the term when any of us say the term open air prison, the mind for someone who hasn't been to Gaza, the only thing you can think of is a concrete slab, a chain link fence, and barbed wire at the top. And I think the lack of knowledge of what actually was in Gaza somehow makes the war easier for people to accept, because they didn't know that it was a population of over 2 million people, the vast majority of people just trying to have a regular life, take care of their family, go to school, go to work, farm. There are farms there. There's business. There are markets, sweet shops, ice cream shops. And so that's a big, giant tragedy here on top of the death and the injuries and the maiming and the health, the mental health crisis, the psychosocial crisis, just the crisis of losing all of that normalcy that actually existed is going to take a long time to bring back.
Yeah. So, and if this is something that goes beyond the area you can discuss, I totally get it. But I met with someone recently here in my office who works with a group of former Israelis who are in the military who now look at what's going on and have concerns within Israel. And their observation is they think one of three things could be happening in Gaza, and then also what they think the future of West Bank is. I'd just love to have your thoughts if you're comfortable sharing those. In Gaza, they had three scenarios. One, that you return to war just like before the ceasefire, except maybe worse, which, by the way, this was before the ceasefire happened, right? So it's almost exactly what happened. Yeah. Second, some version of the general's plan in which Israel will clear out the northern portion of Gaza and take over the territory, and then that there also could be a mass population transfer out of Gaza in line with what Donald Trump has proposed. And then the West Bank, more of the same with a serious acceleration, that Israel begins doing things they wanted to do for years, like demolishing Susia and dismantling the Palestinian Authority, but could stop short of declaring sovereignty, and then a full declaration of sovereignty over part or the whole of the West Bank. For as much as you feel comfortable discussing, what about those observations? Because they're all pretty negative.
Yeah, look, we're in the business of trying to do everything we can on the humanitarian and the long-term human development. We always have to find the bright spots, and they exist because they exist in every human being. But the truth is, that's a pretty accurate description of what's going on, and I think Americans should be very cognizant of and fearful of these outcomes because it doesn't serve anyone. If we have a situation where there's more forced displacement, particularly outside of the Palestinian territories, that does not bring us closer to peaceful coexistence. There are obviously people in Israel, in the government, that think that the solution to the problem is having the Palestinians removed, and that is no solution. And they'll only get stronger, by the way. The Palestinians around the world who learn to survive, as many refugees do, right? We know that refugees are in desperate need of surviving, and so they have to figure out a new language, a new country, a new political system, a new economic system, and many of them thrive. And the smarts and the leadership and the business acumen and the funding and the networks and the know-how and the languages of Palestinian diaspora in the Gulf, in the UK, in Canada, all across the United States is amazing. So if they do kick them all out, they're just going to get stronger, and you're just kicking the issue down the road a generation or two. But Palestinians aren't going to give up on their homeland, and the ones who don't live there are visit, and they support financially and politically and socially, and so. The quicker way to peaceful coexistence is to not have any displacement and to recognize legitimate aspirations of Palestinian people, the same as any people around the world, and work towards that. But those scenarios that you heard are very much what we're seeing. We're very fearful. This general's plan, or these bubbles, there's a plan now to privatize the humanitarian aid going into Gaza. And that's the wrong thing to do. And we're professionals in what we do. We don't try to do other people's work. We know how to do humanitarian aid, human development work. The UN agencies, you can talk about the need for UN reform, et cetera, but they know what they're doing. International NGOs, we know what we're doing. We know how to follow the rules and get things done and get them done effectively. And as I've said before, make sure aid goes to where it needs to go and not to where it shouldn't go. And if you cut us out of the process, that's not going to be good for anyone. So privatizing this, and particularly thinking about just small areas where Palestinians in Gaza will have to come to get aid, just won't work. And I'll say this: the privatization of this, the contracting out to contract groups, I can't get this quote out of my head that I read in the early discussions of this. One of the contract, and I don't think it's the one that did end up getting the contract, but one of them that was talked about, and I think the founder was talking in the media about how his company was going to get a contract to help deliver aid in Gaza. He said, well, it's quite simple. If you're a good guy, we'll give you a plate of food, and if you're a bad guy, we'll give you a bullet in the head. And so if this is being done by people who are thinking along those lines, that's not going to work.
Yeah. So for people who care about human rights in the United States, concerned about what's happening, what can they do?
Look, learn, listen, look as much as you can. There are a lot of great books. This war has been extensively covered, and despite the Israeli restriction on journalists going into Gaza, there's still a complete restriction. I've never seen it written, by the way, but journalists aren't allowed in. But journalists have sprung up. I mean, there were journalists in Gaza. Many of them been killed, but many of them still working. And then people have become journalists. They become citizen journalists. And there's a lot out there. So get engaged, get informed, and then find the groups that are making a difference. And I'm very, very proud of the work that Anera has done over the past 55 years, and particularly over the past 18 months. 64 million meals served, and thousands of tents, and tens of thousands of gallons of water, and hygiene kits, and menstrual management kits, and healthcare provision, and healthcare centers. But we need support. We need financial support. We need moral support. We actually have a lot of financing, but it needs to keep coming. We've been spending. We've been delivering about $1 million of assistance a week for much of this war, and the needs continue. So get engaged, get informed, be supportive of the work that we and others are doing. Highly appreciate it.
How do people keep track of you and the work that Anera is doing?
On our website, which is just Anera, ANERA.org, O-R-G, we have a daily log of everything that we're doing in our response. It's mostly been Gaza. We're starting to track what we're doing in the West Bank as well, and that shows how many millions of meals and everything else we're delivering. So that's a daily updated log, and there's narrative also. So there's statistics there that show what the current need is, what the context is, and how we're responding to that. And then there's a narrative each day on what we've done. So it's all there. We're very transparent on all of the work we're doing, exactly how we're spending the funds of tens of thousands of donors and hundreds of companies and foundations and organizations that are supporting us and doing their work through us or in partnership with us. So very grateful for all of that.
Great. Well, thank you. As a member of Congress, I can't tell people to give to a specific organization. I can say that my family does give to Anera, and we follow your website and information. So thanks for all you do, Sean. Really appreciate you being with us today.
Really appreciate this. Thanks a lot for everything you do, your leadership you're showing here in Congress, and particularly on this issue. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.